Okay, welcome everyone to the Analytic Mind podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Wendy Zhang, who is the Director of Data Governance and Data Strategy at Sallie Mae. So, plenty of great stuff that I know that we can dive into that we haven't had too much experience on the podcast before about. So, things like data governance and data strategy are quite specific topics, and I think to be able to get such a broad overview from you when you say around how you're implementing these sort of things at a large organization is going to be really, really valuable. So why don't I just throw it to you and you can do a much better intro, and then we'll just go from there.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me. Hi, I'm Wendy. I've been working in the data and analytics area for about 15 years, I would say. The way I like to describe my experience is like the way I think about analytics, the different stages of in terms of descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive. Right. So in the first few years of my experience working for the federal government, I was primarily focusing on data collection, validation, analyses, and insights. So that was, in a lot of ways are very related to descriptive in terms of business intelligence and dashboard reporting, which was used in the business decision making. The agency that I worked include the U.S. Air Force and NASA, and also the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which is the Central Bank of America, also a regulator. And from there, I transitioned into the predictive analytics, where I led an analytics team at Wells Fargo. That's like one of the largest banks in the US, where I really focusing on building end-to-end solutions to support the analytics team throughout the entire modeling lifecycle. As of now, I'm the director of data governance. I'm more in focusing on the data strategies and building out the framework to facilitate both the analytics as well as some of the these defensive strategies and like just the effort to report to the regulator. We're also regulated. And by education background, I'm like naturally a business person who transitioned into analytics. Bachelor's in economics and a master's in accounting. And then about 6 years ago, I got my second master's, which I promised myself will be the last master's in business analytics. So that's, in a nutshell, my experience.
Oh, wow, that's fascinating. Oh, man, what an amazing career so far. What is involved in a master's of business analytics? I'm interested.
That's a good question. Is like we like when you think about business analytics, it's pretty much like bootstrapping, exposing us to everything possible. On the more technical side will be machine learning, AI, building out statistical models, regression, and also be just being exposed to all the technologies and algorithms out there. And also really touch on the very basics, but also sufficient in terms of doing predictive analytics in terms of statistics. So we're not statisticians. We didn't come out of the program to ready to become statisticians, but we knew enough statistics to judge our models. So which is really important to understand when, especially in a lot of the time series forecasting, just the general statistical modeling. And then along with that, also focusing on that understanding a lot of the drivers and then the entire life cycle of the model building, not just like the technical aspects of that, but also honing in on like the business skills, trying to not just like build a model, that would be end of the story, but also storytelling, in terms of understanding the model assumptions for different algorithms and the data limitations, how can you address those in the actual algorithms, and how do you actually interpret your model results. So really very in-depth, 2 years of study that I always say that's one, it's not one of the hardest, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And
Really?
when I look back, I don't regret it, but if I were to do that again, I would say no, thank you. But I did learn a lot. Everything that I'm doing today it really is. I have to thank for that 2 years of hard work and just like going to the school and while working at the full time is pretty tough. But I also learned a lot and definitely very rewarding experience.
Yeah, that's great. And did you find that there was a lot of translation to the real world? So you spend a lot of times with your studies, but could you immediately relate it to specific projects that you were working on within your organizations that you could see would add a lot of value?
Yes and no. I would say yes, because we really, the bootstrapping aspect of the program really exposed us to everything that was out there. That being said, that was a few years ago. You keep having the technology really evolves really fast. At the time, we're using Python and SAS and R, and now there are a few new programming languages I never heard of. So it's ready, but in terms of knowing enough to get your hands dirty, but also caveat by saying a lot of the data sets we use to build models in school, they're so clean, compared to real life data sets. And
Right.
it just like you would encounter a lot of more like real and difficult challenges in your data quality. And we all know that in data science, you spend 80% of the time to clean the model. To clean the data before you can start building the model. So we were, I think, and also I think by design in school, you would have a lot of relatively clean data, so you can focus on the more technical aspects of that. And a lot of learning after you come out of school will be understanding the data knowledge that you wouldn't have. There's no way you could have before you start working for a company, very specific domain knowledge and understanding the culture and also the business model, right? So those are the things you couldn't have had, even if you had like an internship, a practicum project, which speaking of which, we actually, like my classmates and I, a group of 5, we did a practicum project. We used the real public data, and it was one of the hardest models we built. In the end, it was pretty successful, but it was also on a much smaller scale. So I would say in terms of the technical capabilities, yes, you can come out of school and then start building models and be sufficient in a lot of technical areas, but you do have to kind of just assimilate into your new environment, understand the the mission of the company, what kind of business problems you're going to solve. You really do have to rely on a lot of people who have been there, have more of the domain knowledge, than you do. But other than that, it's pretty, it's, I would say it's really, really beneficial degree. Yeah.
That's great. And just final thought and question on the education side of things, because it's quite fascinating. One of the biggest trends I've found in many discussions I've had in this podcast is this forever learning in the analytics space, because things are moving so fast. And I would be interested to get your perspective. Did that further education that you pursued, did it really just open your mind at what was possible and enable you to look at projects and implementation that you could do within an organization and with a different framework, because you just had this exposure to different things? You had exposure to different ways you could tackle analytics challenges and problems, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, wholeheartedly, 100%. Like, I don't think anything that I've been doing in the last 5 years would have been possible without that degree. Now, education can come in various forms, right? It doesn't have to be a degree. There are so many like online open courses, like which I take a few a year. I never stop learning. So different form of education, just like in terms of opening up your mind, just being exposed to that possibility. Like, you don't really need to have a PhD in machine learning to understand everything that's going on nowadays. It really, there's just so much resources out there. I always say you don't know what you don't know, right? So just like why not expose yourself through either a formal degree, which is what I did, and I would recommend, but that's not the only way to do it. We're just like online training, and we're just like going to webinars and read up on machine learning and AI. It's just there's a whole world of possibilities. If nothing else, even if people are not very interested in the technical aspects of that, it's still interesting to know like how, because of the fact that the analytics affects us every single day, it's just like every one of us, right? If you have Alexa, I'm just curious, like, how does Alexa work? You don't need to actually think about like the design, the actual code of that. I was actually doing the AI for Everyone course from engineering. He is the one of the founders for Google Brain, and I just found it fascinating. And like, why is it Alexa can answer certain questions, but it can't tell you the meaning of life? Because it's not designed to. Because for everything that you can ask Alexa is one of the behind the scene, one of the programs that they wrote for that specific purpose. So there are all these different functions. So from that standpoint, I don't even need to know what kind of code, like what platform, what kind of technology they use to do that, and how was it like whole team, was it, how did they hash it out? I don't really need to know the intricacies, the technical details, but just knowing that, it's just very fascinating. And the self-driving cars, is one of those things that, electrical vehicles, right? Those things, if you think about it, is really going to touch on all of our lives. And then I think I can think of no other way than continuous education in whatever form that works for you, that really can really open up your mind and be exposed to that world of possibilities.
Yeah, I love that. I love your thoughts on that. And I think exactly the same way. And I really recommend this to anyone. Is I focus on a specific thing with our business, but in reality, I'm watching Udemy. I'm buying Udemy courses on machine learning, AI, advanced analytics, like just random topics that I don't actually do on a day-to-day basis. But it's just I want to know. I want to be able to understand what's going on out there. And I feel like it's kind of just a lot of things can culminate in your brain, and then one day something might pique your interest, and you'll be like, oh, I can bring this new framework to solve that. And just by having, you don't have to I say this, you don't have to understand how to code in every single language that is out there. Like if you can just understand what languages are there, there's an entire universe of people who can actually do this stuff for you and bring their expertise in. And that can be the same in any organization for any individual. Like you don't have to do absolutely everything yourself and know how to code everything yourself, even though that is somewhat beneficial. But just having a really solid, broad understanding of all the stuff is as crucial as anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in this day and age, especially for business people, decision makers and leaders, if you're responsible for any kind of business functions and processes, it's just like knowing what's possible. It can really, really like break you out of the normal way of thinking, to think about what else, is there a better way to do this? And just all the innovations, all the discoveries. It's something that if you really pay attention to, it can free you from the normal way of doing business and thinking, the mindset. It is one of those things, right? The more you read about it, the more you understand. If you want to dive deep and understand the actual data, the modeling algorithms, by all means go for that, right? So, but if you just want to know how things work, what are the new breakthroughs, and how companies and what companies are doing what, this is just like very fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, it is happening so fast. It's crazy.
Yeah,
I mean, there's so many other ways. Like there's YouTube. There's so many great channels on YouTube. There's Udemy. There's obviously like a lot of great blogging sites, email subscriptions you can get. I mean, books. They're just bringing all this knowledge together. Like if it's something that interests you, like I'm sure it does to both of us, there's so much you can dive into. It's really, really quite interesting, and super exciting, because I feel like in the analytics space, and I'm sure you feel the same way, is that we're really in a part of organizations which are generating huge amounts of value. This is where the real value drivers are coming from right now, and in the very near future is coming from the analytics space. What you can do with machine learning, etc.
And it's going to keep going. It's not going to stop.
No doubt, no doubt. Okay, jumping back to your current role, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about what are the things that you're doing day to day on the government side and the strategic side. So, what are your main responsibilities within your organization? Because it's you're sort of more, you've moved on from sort of the analyst side to someone who's sort of overseeing that. And so what are the main things that you're so focused on a regular basis?
Sure. Is in my mind, it always comes back to data. Is that the algorithms and programming languages, technology, it all matters. But at the end of the day, the very first one is what kind of business you're trying, problem you're trying to solve. The other one is how good is your data. So I'm very data, and I really believe you can address many of the data benefits of the build and a little effort a lot easier, and you're going to get much better results as well. So that's kind of what prompted me into like overseeing the analytic function in terms of like data governance and data strategy, is really trying to drive a data-driven culture. So the people talk about that a lot. I think there's so many components to that. And what I do nowadays is to really think about data as an asset to the organization, and how are we using it, and how do we want to use it? So that's where the prescriptive part comes in. Like, how can that make it happen? And something like, I'm sure that's not just only unique to us, is that there is the defensive side is like we're still being regulated, so there's the compliance and risk, and then so we have to have defensive strategy, which is very important, to be compliant. And the other side is the offensive, just think about how you can derive the most business value. Like, how can you really utilize data as an asset? I think of like defensive strategies, like what you have to do, and offensive is what you need to do, to thrive and to as a business to succeed. So my role is really just that encompasses data strategy, governance, management, quality, and all of that to establish the framework. But it's not just about policies and procedures. I think one of the hardest things in terms of building data-driven culture is the mindset. It is a culture that has not adopted data-driven culture that is like one of the biggest roadblock. So is identifying what's most important processes, and then those I like to call it where it hurts the most, but also that's still kind of defensive, but also where we can benefit the most, and that requires like taking a holistic view of your organization data. But I think this is true for any organization. Like, we just have so much data, and then people always use the term that you can't boil the ocean, right? So we can't possibly govern everything, and nor would you want to. So that's where you really want to. But before you make that decision, that you have to really understand your data really well, what it is, the history, the lineage, the structure, the limitations, and then how data is being used, and then that will require a lot of internal discussions and collaboration with a lot of different functions. So in for probably very high level, that is what I do. But I like to think of myself just like trying to make great things happen, not just like policies and procedures. Because as I said, it really requires transformative effort for the entire organization to see things a certain way before we can succeed together.
That's great. I love how you framed up some of those thoughts, like data as an asset, like looking at it as an asset, just like you would as a building or your people.
Mm-hmm.
Data is something that is sitting within every organization, and it is, if you utilize it correctly, it's just like it's almost like a raw material. It's like a commodity. It's like getting minerals out of the ground. It's kind of like it's sitting there, right? You need to mine it, and then you need to then repurpose it or trying to on sell it at a great, an additional gain or get that higher value out of it. So I love that. And also the defensive and offensive. I haven't heard that before, but that's I guess that's quite specific to your role and your company. But I quite like it. It's always bringing a sport analogy into the mix always works well. Always sits well with me. But yeah, so one of the things that I'd like to dive into there is like, how do you identify and prioritize your assets? Your data assets. So data is everywhere. It's being created all the time. Every year there's the ability to extract more data, to organize it, etc., in a better way. So how do you stay on top of that, but then also figure out, okay, what prioritizing should we be focusing on here? Like, what is going to extract the most value, or is going to be the most beneficial for our regulators, etc. So, I'd be interested to dive into that.
Yeah. The way I think about it is it could be driven by many different things, so there obviously more than one way to look at it. It could be business process driven. It could be like a cost center, like a profit driver driven. It could be just driven by like mandate, in some cases it could be regulatory mandate, which is not the case for us. But there are like certain things like we do think about, right? So like comes back to defensive or offensive, then there are going to be some low hanging fruit, which is important for us to pick, especially at the very beginning of establishing a framework, which I've done a few times, is like, I find value propositions really important. That the very crucial component of getting people to change their mind is like to show them, like to show them what you can achieve, especially in a very short period of time. So I would say that in looking at data assets, and you really have to take a deep dive into understanding the company's processes. Like very large organizations, we're not that large at this point, but I have worked for really, really large organizations where you think about it, it probably take me like decades to do that, right? So that again will come back to something like maybe for us, like defensive strategies, like is there anything that we would like to improve in our current process, right? Is there any pain point? People to buy in, it's also important to establish us as part of the business. Something that the analytics leaders often face is that we're often seen as a cost center. We don't derive, revenue directly. So at the end of the day, like in good times, right, when people want to feel like it, they want to build up their analytics team, they want to have all the insights. But in bad times, right, where like funding is less than like last year, where the outlook is less than ideal, then we immediately they think about cutting costs, right? So there's only that much you can do with revenue, and there's that mindset, and I always try to make sure that we position ourselves as part of the business process. We're not just here, whether as a governance manager or analytics manager, we're not here to police you. We're not here to implement unnecessary processes, procedures on you. We're here to supplement what you're doing, and we can make whatever you're doing like better, faster, more accurate, more interpretable. Just like all holistically a better results. So that's one thing. So when like in terms of I think about data assets. And then I also think like there are going to be some hidden opportunities where, there are going to be low hanging fruit, and which is important to pick them just to show your value early on. But there are also going to be hidden opportunities, because if we, again, come back, we don't know what we don't know, right? If we always do things the same way, then we're never going to improve and innovate. So I like to look at areas that are not usually drawing a lot of attention. You really think about like if this is a connector to a lot of other processes. It may not be very obvious through on the surface, but once you take a deeper dive and understand all the intricacies and how all the processes and business components are intertwined, you can a lot of time find a very important connectors that are not on anybody's radar, but would absolutely bring a lot of value if you really dig into it. Those kind of things is they do have some risk, so you could like not know what you sign up for. So I always say that you proceed with caution, but if they do pay off, right? If nothing else, it could be insights to supplement the existing processes and all the different components. But the best case scenario is actually you find something valuable and a data asset that people never paid attention to before, and you can derive so much more business value out of it. Then you're really a rock star. Then it really adds a lot of credibility, and it gives people faith. So that's like really important, and just to succeed as a data function.
Right. And I'd be interested to know what sort of technologies or processes that you've built around understanding how the business is using their data or collecting their data. Is there anything unique that you feel like you're doing well that could showcase to others how you can do this effectively?
So a lot of the businesses will actually already have their own data systems, and it's more of understanding how the databases will work together. But in terms of data governance, there are a lot of data governance tools that would help you from start to finish, from the very beginning, data discovery to data quality validation, to machine learning and AI capability to help you do that. So there are a lot of technologies out there. Some of the ones that are well known, like Informatica and Calibra and Elation, and then like Big ID, and along with that, there are a lot of machine learning ops as well. So, and Snowflake in terms of being the cloud option. And then, but also that a lot of technologies, they are able to integrate with each other. All of the ones I mentioned, they are really high on the data management, like quadrant, like Gartner put together. So those are the ones, depending on your specific needs, and you really have a lot to choose from. But I would say like data governance, unless a company is brand new on the journey, is less about choosing the right tool, because I think whichever tool you choose, it most likely is going to work with your existing infrastructure, right, your platform. And then most likely you've already figured out certain ways to customize to make it work for you. But it's more of tying all the pieces together, so technology is an enabler. If you have deficiencies in your data pipelines, technology most likely is not going to fix that. And you with discovering data qualities. And then think about like when we build like AI machine learning models, like we have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, but now it's like even within supervised learning, it's really important to label the data. But there's now like self-supervised learning, right? So where you don't actually need people to label the data, it can label itself and then build models on itself, which again, it's just like fascinating, just with all the new development.
And I'd love to learn about an example of where you've implemented some of these AI and machine learning methodologies into certain processes. Is there any high level examples that you can give as to where you're seeing these analytics techniques add a lot of value?
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that I mentioned that in terms of that to help with data quality, oftentimes when you have a lot of data and then like you want to detect and cleanse your data in the data wrangling stage. This is where like machine learning and AI can actually help you do that instead of you doing that manually, then which traditionally has been a very like manual process, right? In the supervised learning, you have to go in and label all the data. Say, for example, like this is not my specific example, but just hear this used a lot, that traditionally when you want to detect like spam emails, that you actually have to go in and label them spam, not spam, 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 not spam, not spam, right? But now it's like the supervised learning is actually enabling that, especially in natural language processing, text analytics, where instead of like people trying to label the sentences, complete the sentences, the self-supervised learning can actually remove some words from the sentence and then label itself. So that is a process where, like, in terms of like data quality, machine learning, it still depends so much on the actual label that we give to the data set. And with the model is only as good as the labels, how accurate they are. But nowadays, it's just the breakthrough in this area can really remove, I would say maybe not completely, but for the most part, remove the manual process and like do these things a lot faster, a lot more accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like there's actually that's a really interesting answer. Because I think when a lot of us think about analytics, they think of a dashboard, they think of a report. But the actual fact is that there's this whole data pipeline, and machine learning can actually be plugged in at all of these different parts of the pipeline. I mean, it can even be plugged in at the data capture part of the pipeline. I mean, you can capture so much data through voice now, through bots, through all those types of things. And so, like if you break down the pipeline, machine learning doesn't sound like in one area. It's kind of like it can fit into all of these different segments to optimize the entire pipeline, to automate a lot of the insights in the pipeline. And then ultimately, yes, you might get a KPI dashboard, or you might get a report that has insights that you can act on, you can make decisions, but it's being helped along the way. It's been optimized along the way quite significantly. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. You summarized it perfectly. You said much better than I did. I think like traditionally when we think about the machine learning process is like, okay, we get data, right? And then we start cleaning, spend a lot of time data wrangling, and then make it workable. And then we build models, and and then you go through the whole process to choose the champion model using whatever criteria you deem adequate. And the next step is interpretation, right? So it's like, how do you interpret the model results? And then after that, right, depending on the business problem you're trying to solve, you could be predicting like your revenue. You could be making a decision whether to allow the loan application to go through, those kind of things. It's like, but nowadays that machine learning really has like kind of, instead of being in the middle of the spectrum, is when everything has been said and done about the data. Now you have machine learning. It's actually machine learning is helping you clean the data, help you label it, help you find anomalies and deficiencies. So that's where it's like machine learning doing whatever it does here, and then so that it can go through the pipeline and get to the actual model building stage. That's exactly what you summarized.
Yes. Yeah, I like the idea of a data pipeline. Is to not, if we really want to expand the knowledge base in the analytics community, I think you've got to understand a bit more up and down the stack. Data pipeline. It's not just about running formula and creating charts. It's about just understanding how you can bring a lot of different attributes of the pipeline together, and that's how you're going to really successfully build quite valuable assets. It's how you're going to really utilize your assets. Going back to what you mentioned earlier. Yeah, what are some of the because governance it sounds like is a big part of your role. What are some of the challenges around data governance that you are finding working with multiple different areas of a large organization?
Sure. there are a lot of challenges in terms of data governance, and then I think one of the biggest one is like for any organization to really implement a new framework is the mindset, the culture. It just like it is one of those things that is very important. We spend unproportional amount of time to build out the foundation, the framework, and then the other part is also that like there are a lot of like competing priorities, right? So when you think about all the data you have, like I mentioned, every organization has so much data. How do you determine what to govern, right? And then how to govern it, and then how do you drive value from that? Is that something you just have to do? Defensive strategy that because the regulator is going to ask for it. So you do want to be compliant, but it's not sufficient, right? So it's one of those things that, okay, like I do what I have to do, but at the same time, how does that help me with the offensive strategy of like deriving business value? So those things like, and then the approach, right? Do you start with everything, or do you randomly pick something? And this ties back to your question of how to manage data as an asset. So there are a lot of careful planning and just like a collaboration that goes into it. But I also think it's one of the challenges is like coming back to mindset is like people think it's a project, right? You have a start, you have a finish, you have deliverable, and then you're done. So and unbeknownst to them, it's just like, oh, we're never going to be done. As long as your organization is here and you have data, you always have to govern that, right? So it's the mindset of that this is the destination that we can get to, instead of that this is the something that's going to add value to us. We're going to keep doing this as long as it adds value. And then, then it comes back to that you have to do it correctly to add value. And how do you prove that? And then one of the very more practical challenges in data governance is that data is often siloed. In a lot of organizations, you have very many different business components. And then they also have very different ways to look at data, right? So as a business person, from an accounting standpoint, and it's very understandable. And I think people should look at data from different perspectives, slice and dice it however that fits your purpose. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to go from segregation to aggregation and have a single source of truth. I get asked this quite a bit because, coming from the regulator is like, we really advocate for a single source of truth. I always say that it is something that you need to have, but it doesn't have to be the only thing you have. You can absolutely have multiple versions of truth as long as you have the ability to get to a single source of truth. It's not so much like, why should I have it? It's more about, why don't you have it? So it's just like it's more revealing of the underlying processes, the deficiencies that you have in place that stop you from getting there. That's more revealing of something that needs to be done. Having single source of truth is more than just satisfying regulatory requirements. If your data is siloed, how do you have confidence in business decisions that you're making? Siloed data are inevitably leading to siloed business decisions. So that's those sort of things like, data silo, and then not understanding the internal processes, not knowing where to start, and starting too big, we're starting too small. All of those are like very delicate approaches, so it's something that nobody really has the complete like perfect answer, even for people who have done this for a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. It's more of like, you have to find what works for your organization, and then you're probably not going to succeed at the one try. You're going to get a lot of resistance, but at the end of the day, it's absolutely an effort like worthwhile. It's going to pay off.
That's great. And from your experience, what do you think works better from a governance and strategy point of view? Is it more a centralized or decentralized strategy?
I think it depends. I know that sounds like a cop out, right? There's no one answer. Like, there's no one way that works for every single organization. And I talk to my fellow data leaders in the industry as well. Like generally, you really have to decide what works for you. If a centralized function works for you, you just have to make sure that all your individual components, like underneath that centralization, they still maintain their domain knowledge and then their individual practices, so to make sure that nothing is lost, that you're not just like summing up all the authorizations and practices and the usage of the data. But on the other hand, if you decide, and I know some people have a stronger opinion about this, like each individual line of business should have their own practices, functions. I can see that as well, because only you know your business the best. But at the end of the day, your data architecture has to accommodate the segregation. Wouldn't call that silo, because silo will be there just like independent of each other, not communicating with each other, right? So segregation is fine if it's decentralized, but you just have to make sure that you go from segregation to aggregation. So at the top, and then you have a centralized function to bring everything together. So I think it's really something that companies have to ask themselves, what would work, what would make sense, and then it would absolutely take some trial and error and just trying different ways and to see what works for them.
Nice. Yeah, one thing from my experience I've seen is that you can very happily be decentralized, but you need some sort of centralized coordination. That would be the main thing that I've seen, is that if you just go for this full-on decentralized and everyone goes off and does kind of like their own thing, even though they know their business the best, I just think you run into too many issues down the track when then there's just no coordination between everyone. There's no commonality in how they're building things. There's no communication around what data sets they're using. It can just become a little bit of a mess. And yeah, so it sounds like it can vary. It can totally vary, and there can be like overlap. Like sometimes you can centralize some things because the assets probably deem that. The data assets deem that, but in other areas maybe not. I mean, I think there's no perfect answer there, unfortunately. But it's good to get your thoughts on it, and certainly your advice, because you've probably dealt with a number of different situations, like just trying to figure that out. As data has evolved and the importance of it has evolved. A lot of this thinking and strategy implementation is around implementation is evolving too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also like to add, like, it's not something that's like one and done, is set in stone. It's not like if we're centralized, we're always going to be centralized, or vice versa. And things change, right? Your business changes, and then your data changes, your processes, and everything would change. And technology, like, I can't think of anything that doesn't change. And as your situation, external or internal situations change, you might find that one approach doesn't work for you anymore. And there's nothing wrong with wanting go from one way to the other and back and forth, as long as you understand what you're doing, what you're signing up for, so you're not always just like flip-flopping, right? So it's absolutely okay for things to change and for us to adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I really get the vibe from you that you come at things in quite a flexible mindset. You're not fixed on this is how it's going to be. It's kind of like things can happily evolve based on what you're dealing with, what you want to achieve. And yeah, I really like the way that you sort of think about things.
Sure. I think that comes from the fact that I've worked across the different industries, from nonprofit to the federal and then to the private. But even like within each sector, then, I've worked in a few different companies and organizations or agencies, and everybody does things differently, so there's really no standardized way to do things, which is absolutely fine. At the end of the day, you really have to do what works for your organization.
That's great. I think that's a brilliant point to end on. And why don't we wrap things up here, Wendy? We've almost gone for an hour. So really enjoyed getting insights from yourself today. Really like how you frame up a lot of your thoughts around analytics ideas and strategies. So, really appreciate your time. And I'm sure the listeners have got a lot out of our conversation today.
Thank you. I enjoyed this discussion with you as well. Thanks for having me.
That's great. That's great. Okay, everyone, thanks for tuning in. And don't forget to subscribe to the Analytic Minds on your favorite podcast listening app. And we also put this up on our YouTube channel as well. So definitely subscribe there to listen to many more great discussions just like this one. Okay, take care, everyone.